Well, I'd like to thank you, Ben, and of course everyone here at the Refinery for letting me come and talk. I've come to all the meetings. I've really been intrigued about what I've seen so far, and so I wanted to share something that I've been working on for a couple months now, and I think you guys will enjoy it. Just so you know, my name is Josh Sanabria. I'm a master's architecture student here at Andrews, and I've gone here for just about 6 years now. And what I'd like to talk to you about is Rurban. This is a company I started this summer. Done a lot of stuff in the past, but this is kind of like wrapping it all together. And maybe you can catch from the name, but it's a combination of rural and urban. And so combining those two and seeing what you can create that can engage both of those realms, since obviously many people will be moving into metropolitan areas in the next coming decades. But of course, people still have that connection to the rural landscape. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about a modular data center. This is something I've been working on and designing along with my friend Brian here and Tanner, and kind of exploring what this is about. Basically, the modular data center is designed for flexibility. It's kind of implied by the word modular. But most of all, it's designed for community integration, which architects love to build things for people. And so I took that interest and then my interest with technology and said, how can we combine these two to make something really unique? But before we get into that, let's start at the most basic. What is a data center anyway? Okay. Perfect. So data center, the most simplest form, okay, it's full of these things called servers, which are basically computers that are very efficient, have a very small, physical footprint, and you can do all sorts of things with them. These servers go inside something called a rack. A rack is basically just a tower full of servers. You could have 30, 50 computers, servers stacked up. They're about maybe 8 feet high. So when you get that sort of idea, if everyone's laptop was kind of stacked on top of each other, that's kind of what it would look like. And then you have all of these racks going together to form these units or clusters or rows. But basically the idea is you have a lot of efficiency and a lot of power. And all of these go inside what's called a data center. So again, to make it absolutely simple, a data center is basically just a building full of computers. Now, what do we actually use them for? Well, everyone in this room actually uses one. Because anytime you use your phone to do anything, especially if it's a smartphone, you're accessing a data center. One example might be Facebook photos. Anytime you download, look, upload, like, whatever it is, you're accessing Facebook's data centers where all of your photos and all of your other data is stored. Again, they might be hundreds of miles away, but you're still using them. Another use might be for a university. They're obviously not necessarily trying to access Facebook photos, but they might be trying to compute very complicated gene research or structural research, or whatever it is. They use this concentrated computing power to then accomplish whatever it is that they're trying to do. So that's basically the overview of the data center. So, like any business, you have to solve something that has a problem. So, the question is, what is wrong with today's data centers? Well, first of all, they're very, very expensive. If you can imagine, like we were talking about with the racks, you have 50 computers stacked up in each other. That's not cheap. If each one of those costs $1,000, you have $50,000 just sitting right here in this little tower. And a data center could potentially have hundreds, if not thousands of racks. So you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of computers. So they're very expensive. Next, because they take up all this space, they're typically out in the middle of nowhere. So they're not really integrated into society. You don't typically drive past one and say, oh, hey, look, it's a data center. It just doesn't happen, right? It's basically the factory of the 21st century. On that note, they're very large because there hasn't been a focus on efficiency of land use or necessarily in the building. There's been a focus of efficiency merely with the actual rack and that sort of end, but there hasn't been much on the large scale. So this is another reason why they're typically out in the middle of nowhere, where they're not taking up valuable land space, but at the same time they're not really interacting with the location that they're at. And that kind of goes along with this idea that we don't know anything about them, right? There's no like McDonald's of data center. There's no Best Buy. There's no like Walmart. There's no name that you can immediately draw from and say, okay, that's where I know my stuff is being held, or that's where I know that my company in the future has to go and purchase computing power or whatever it is. So now the question is, we have all these kind of 4 issues here. What do we do to solve them? Or what can we begin to say is the solution? That's where I wanted to start. So first of all, you start by giving it a name. You start with this concept of Rurban, where you're providing services that serve both the metropolitan community and the rural community that is beginning to come online in many places of the world. Next, you make it modular so that you can have varying sizes. So it doesn't always have to be huge. It doesn't always have to be small. There's a lot of middle ground for you to expand. Also, you make the design such so that it can be part of the community, which has benefits in bringing, of course, jobs to community, connecting people to the internet by having the physical location closer to you, which might basically allow you to have faster internet speeds, and also to be part of mixed-use development, where perhaps the data center doesn't need to be a building on its own, but just like offices can be grouped with retail on the bottom floor, maybe you can have retail on the bottom floor and data center 20 stories up. Next, you make it scalable so that a businessman, even if he doesn't have any idea what a data center is, can perhaps franchise it, purchase the franchise, have this kind of unit or module, and then expand upwards or sideways, however the market needs it. This might be good in developing nations where they may not have hundreds of millions of dollars to put in one singular building, but if you spread out the cost amongst hundreds or thousands of entrepreneurs in the country, you can accomplish the same sort of magnitude, but just spread out. And on that note, you give it the opportunity to then spread to these other locations by giving it an identity, by making it accessible to a somewhat regular business opportunity. So the question is, what do you actually do to get one of these? What makes us, Rurban, so different? Well, I created this little guy, right? So he has a business in his town. Doesn't really matter where it is, but he already knows a little bit about business. He's looking into other markets to expand, but he doesn't necessarily know a lot about technology, but he knows enough. Hopefully somewhere nearby, we have a Rurban Data Center that has all the proper marketing and business and all of that paperwork and information so that it can give it to our little guy. So he has the information to say, okay, building a scalable data center might be something that I can afford. Even if I can only build one module at a time, maybe this can be my next business. So we basically ship him the module, which, to make it as simple as possible, is the frame or actual building that the computers go inside. So we're not designing computers, we're not trying to be like Apple per se or Dell or anything like that. We're sourcing those from those other companies that have a lot of R&D. What we're basically providing is the atmosphere or the environment to actually put those things in, and then forming the business model so that it actually makes sense for our young entrepreneur. So one option might be that he literally puts it on top of his existing business. The benefit of the modular system is that you can make the structure work in a way that it can connect to existing structure. perhaps even in a way so that his local business doesn't ever have to shut down while this is being constructed. During this time, using the corporate marketing that we give him, he can go out searching for customers. Business centers, data centers, do business in multiple ways. One way is a service called co-location. So that's basically you rent out space and X company comes and puts their computer inside, and all you're providing is the electricity and basically room and board, right? So maybe that's one option. So during this construction time, he's looking for those customers. Pretty soon though, it's completed. And so now he has two businesses, something that he can expand and something that he already owns. Maybe he finances the data center on top. That part is flexible. Maybe he builds an all new one. Maybe it goes up. Maybe it goes horizontal if he has more space. Maybe this isn't just a data center on the bottom. Maybe he rents this bottom portion out and he has a data center on top so he can change businesses. Maybe it all is a data center. Doesn't matter. Then you start to explore the alternative uses. Okay, if you want data center on the bottom, maybe the top can be apartments, and the excess heat from the data center on the bottom can serve the apartments on top. Because these computers produce a lot of heat. All of you have had your laptop on your lap at some point or another, and it gets pretty hot. Well, imagine 40 of those in such close proximity in a tower times a dozen. That's a lot of heat that has to be managed somehow. So maybe that's one solution. My favorite solution is maybe you make it part of the actual community by like a government and private relationship. So in this theoretical diagram, you have a new type of library that has more digital resources. Maybe the bottom is 3D printers and laser scanners and laser cutters, and you teach the public how to use those devices that maybe they can't typically afford or they want to take classes in, and then you subsidize that with your income from renting out your data center space. So it's really making it very flexible and able to be integrated into a lot of different businesses with relative simplicity. And that all comes together to kind of bring together our goal, which is, imagine a data center on every main street. And I say main street because that implies that it's part of society and that it's actually serving society in some sort of beneficial, intrinsic, but also economical way. That's it. Thank you. If there's any questions, you can take those. If not, that's okay too.
Give people some time to think of their questions.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if you addressed this or not, but why would someone need access to one of these servers, like for their business or something?
Mm-hmm. No, you're talking about the actual physical computer, right?
Yeah, like the
right. Okay, so you don't really need a lot of people going into these server rooms. You need basically a person who knows how to manage IT. Maybe you have a small team, but it's not like you need 40, full on-time employees. Basically, the employees are there for basically just making sure the lights stay on, so to speak, and preventing any sort of hiccups. And then also there is service. Computers do break; they're not eternal, so that sort of upkeep. This is kind of the paradox of this, of trying to integrate it into society while realizing that the actual physical room where the computers are will not be publicly accessible. Because you can't have, if I'm renting server space from you, I don't want anyone else just randomly walking in there and unplugging wires, right? So the actual physical room is not accessible. It's more about the ecosystem of it, where it's saying, what products or services around this idea can we offer?
How would it sound like Berrien Springs benefit from hearing?
Actually, I've been thinking about this. Berrien Springs could actually benefit a lot because our land is inexpensive. Technically, we do have a dam in town. And one way that is emerging to power these things is through hydropower. So theoretically, you could purchase land near the dam. You could hook up a power source directly to the building from the dam. And then because it's more of a modular system, you wouldn't need to lay a huge amount of foundations or do really a lot of work. You basically just have the most basic, basic building as possible, and you can put it there. And then, in our case, obviously we have engineering students and people who are training to be in IT, and that can be a great resource for us. Theoretically, we could also have faster internet.
Who are the competitors?
Oh, well, that's the interesting thing. There's a lot of companies building data centers, sort of, right? So you have the big places that are gaining popularity because they're cheaper to manage, and then you have a lot of smaller places that are closing because they're inefficient. One example might be Andrews, right? We technically have a data center, but it's basically in a closet. If we were more efficient, or if we really wanted to access a lot more power, we could build our own, or probably go to South Bend, where there is a large data center that the University of Notre Dame uses for their networking. So there's a lot of different ways. So the small stuff is closing, it's becoming more proprietary, and in that sense there's competitors who want to provide that service. So they're building warehouses full of servers, essentially.
So how does this differentiate between them?
What it does is it says that the responsibility of building those isn't necessarily on the corporation themselves, right? So this involves a system of franchising it. So you have the modular unit, you have all of the paperwork and the system of franchising in order, so that Rurban can franchise it to any number of business students and they can set up their own. And this kind of spreads out the cost. Like I said before, it might be good in a developing society, developing nation. For instance, Myanmar is recently opening to the internet, but they don't necessarily have hundreds of millions of dollars to build these huge places. But they might have 5, 10 million kind of scattered across. Well, if you can use your 5 or 10 million to build a couple units, we're accomplishing the same amount of power, just more democratized.
How does the energy efficiency compare between a large data center,
Sure.
like X computing power, versus a bunch of smaller ones
Right.
with the same power?
Yeah. Okay, so what you use is called the power use efficiency ratio, PUE, and that basically says you get this amount of power to crunch numbers divided by this amount of power in kilowatts or megawatts that is coming into the building. And the idea is to get as close to 1 as possible. So 1 is perfect, right? We haven't necessarily run all of those tests yet, but there are similar units that are being made for, let's say, combat applications. So they're basically just in a shipping container that have anywhere between a 1.5 to a 1.75 and above, of course. But that seems to be a good ratio. So it is already being applied, but not in this context, and certainly not in the context of putting it in communities and making it that mixed use function.
Okay, I am probably 95% ignorant to a lot of what you are talking about,
That's
but
okay.
it seems to me as though one of the very pivotal parts to this is brand recognition,
Mhm.
because I could not name a data center, even one.
Right.
And if I was looking for a data center, it would help to have some sort of name, even in my mind at all.
Sure.
So what is the strategy, or have you thought of a strategy to make Rurban, something that every entrepreneur knows about when they're thinking of something to expand on or
Sure.
a new part of their business.
I agree. I mean, that's part of the challenge, and that's also part of the goal. You know, at one point or another, no one knew what a McDonald's was, right? And they've done a lot of probably bad advertising and good advertising to get where they are. And I'm not saying it's all about, you know, putting ads on TV and whatever. I think maybe there's a point for that. I think at least in the short term, it's expressing this idea that you have something new to bring to the table, which in certain communities like this one, you know, people are interested out and want to know more about. As for achieving like complete saturation where like every single person knows what a Rurban Data Center is, that's a long way off, I will be honest. But, you know, I think it's the type of thing where you can start in pockets, you can start in certain communities, and then because of a world we live in where everyone's moving and everyone's interacting in a different way, I think it's possible. There was an interesting comment that was on Facebook a little while ago when the iOS 7 came out, and it was, I remember the days when you would get beat up for being excited about an operating system, right? But that doesn't matter because everyone in my class had their phone on the table and they were downloading it, right? So we have a little bit of an advantage, and then that is kind of the ecosystem that we live in currently.
I understand that a lot of companies are now outsourcing for data and looking at it the same
Sure.
way. Can you quickly just touch on the pricing? Let's say I'm a business individual and
Sure.
I want to have one of these. How much will it cost me? What's my return on my investment for having one of these items?
Right.
How is that working now?
Yeah. Okay. I will qualify my statement before I say anything that I haven't done all of the numbers, right? But just going off of what I know, the actual building is the cheap part. You know, you can build a building for about $100 per square foot. So these are maybe $80,000 to build, which sounds like a lot, but honestly for a building that's nothing, okay? The expensive portion is the servers because those can cost upwards of $1,000, $2,000, whatever, you know, power you're looking for. So that's the expensive part. So in total right now, I think you could build one module with 48 servers for maybe $2 million, which sounds like a lot again, but if you look at the research of, let's say if I open a McDonald's, that is the price of a McDonald's. And I have to put up 40% of that before I can even hope to build my McDonald's. So when you're looking at the initial investment of, you know, $800,000, $2 million, McDonald's, you know, maybe we have a similar system where you put up 40 or 30% depending on where you are in the world. It's pretty comparable to other franchise. And that's, you know, that's a small McDonald's. We're not even starting to talk about the larger things. You know, to open up like, I don't know, an Olive Garden is another $1 million and so on.
I think we need to probably wrap
Sure.
that part up so we can get to the next part. But thank you so much. Exciting.
Thank you.